Hello, and welcome to Exchanging Eternal Truths, brought to you by Expanding Your Faith Ministries in Anderson, South Carolina. I'm your host, author Heather Lancaster, and I'm happy to be joined yet again by Pastor Chris Sustar of High Praises Church here in Anderson. And today we're going to continue our talk about leadership, but we're going to focus on the topic of managing yourself. So, Pastor Chris, thank you for coming back.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back. We had a good time the last time, I remember.
Yeah, we did. And so, what is it about managing yourself? We had this great discussion last time about leadership. So, how does that go into this topic of managing yourself?
Okay, so let me just ask your viewers some questions. Okay, I like to do this, and then
Okay.
we'll talk about what I mean when I say self-management. So just see if any of you who are watching, if this resonates with you. Okay, so do you start a project and then abandon it to start another project? Okay, so Heather, don't you answer. Uh,
I'm keeping my mouth shut.
do you intend to do important things? You intend to, but then you never actually get around to doing them. Okay. All right. Question three. Do you get to the end of the day and you feel exasperated because you feel like you have accomplished very little, but you felt like you did a lot? Okay. Next question. Have you ever said, I wish there were more hours in the day? I mean, who hasn't done that, right?
I
I
think we
wish there
all
was
say
more
that.
hours in the day. Right. Okay. Last question. It's actually two. Are you always late to meetings or events? And then do you make excuses to justify your tardiness? Uh-oh, that one
Oof.
probably hit home with a few people. Okay. The reason I ask those questions, and when I teach this subject, I ask those questions. So I wanted to ask your viewers that is because if you said yes to one or two or three or all of those, then the reality is you're probably struggling with self-management. And I became really aware with self-management, and I mentioned this guy, and I think in the last session, John Maxwell, who's
Mhm.
influenced. I've read a bunch of other books. So I don't want anybody thinking, oh, you read John Maxwell. No, I've read hundreds of lit books. But John has some concise things, so they're really kind of cool to pull from at times. But John Maxwell was, and he was actually on like the Today Show or something and actually talked about this. There's a concept that you hear and people will talk about time management. I just
Mhm.
need better time management. You ever heard that? Because I
Oh,
need
yeah.
just if I just had better time management. And John Maxwell made this shocking statement. He said, "There's no such thing as time management." And the people in the show said, "What?" He said, "There's no such." He said, you get the same 24 hours a day every day. You don't get 48 one day and 36 the other. And you got to manage more hours and some day less hours than another day. He said, you get the same amount of hours every day.
Right.
He said, you don't manage time. He said, you manage yourself. And
Yeah.
that's revolutionary, isn't it?
It really is, because all you hear is time management, but it makes a lot of sense because the only variable in that is you.
Exactly. So here's an anecdote. So my wife, who is awesome and so talented and can do so many things, and she can do things that I can't even do, and I just look at her and say, "How do you do that?" You know, but she would tell you she struggles with being late, and she has some ADD, so she'll get started in one project, and then we'll be working in the house, and then we'll start a project. She'll disappear, and I'll say, I'll walk out. Where'd you go? I'm in here working on another project. I'm like, we're still in this project, you know. But it's when you have so again, she struggles that, but self-management is where you say, "Okay, I'm gonna manage myself. I'm gonna look at what I need to do to get things done." And so Leah will say to me, like, I'll say, "Okay, I'm gonna go run errands." I said, "I got like 6 things to do. I'll be back." And I'll leave, and I'll come back in 45 minutes. And she'll say, "Are you done already?" I said, "Yeah." "How did you get it all done?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "How did you get all that done?" I said, "Because I had a plan. I had
Right.
already mapped out which store I was going to, and I had mapped it out that it's all on the same side of the road." And I said, "I went in, I got it done, I got out, I hit, and I said, I'm done." And she's like, "I can't believe it. I can't do it. Would take me 3 hours to do that." I said, "It's you just got to manage yourself. You got to say, got to get it done." So that's kind of an anecdotal evidence. Again, she can do so many more greater things than me. But when self management is really, Heather, about taking personal responsibility.
Yeah.
So you're taking responsibility for your behavior. Ultimately, you're taking responsibility for your well-being because
Yeah.
when you manage yourself, then and you could call this, somebody said, "Well, you just sound like you're talking about self-control." Well, it is. It sounds like self-regulation. Well, it is. So whether you want to call it self-management, self-control, self-regulation, it's the ability to manage your behavior, your thoughts, your emotions. It's the ability to schedule in a conscious and productive way. And
Right.
so anybody can do this, but some people are going to struggle more. And again, if you have like ADD, which is a very real thing, then you might struggle more. If you, some people are just not very organized, okay, at all. And so the concept of self-organizing is will then just make it even more difficult. So while it is trouble for some and easier for others, it doesn't matter. Everybody can do this.
Yeah.
There's a guy that James Merritt, he wrote self management. I wrote this quote down. Self management is lining up your want to with your should do and then
Yeah.
doing it. That's
That's
pretty
true.
good, isn't it? So
That is
line
good.
up your want, yep, line up your want to with your should do and then go do it.
Yeah.
Okay. And by the way, since we're Christians on this, this podcast, and maybe I'm sure a lot of people listening are Christians. There's actually a scripture in the Bible that lines up with this, and I think this might be interesting. It's First Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. I'm going to read it. Okay.
Okay.
Paul said, "Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. And everyone who competes for the prize, notice these words, is temperate, which means self-controlled,
It's a
self
fruit of the spirit.
self-managed, right? It's temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. Therefore, I run thus, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air." And notice these words, but I discipline my body. That's self management. I bring it into subjection. That's self management. Lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. So here's a leadership concept. I really can't lead others well until I lead myself well. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And again, from a biblical perspective, I'm reminded of this verse in James 4, where it's 4:17, and it says, "Therefore to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin." There are things that God asks us to do, whether you're a leader, whether it's in your ministry, whether it's in your business, whether it's in your home life. There are times God asks us to do something. And if we don't do it, even though it's not against the 10 commandments or something like that, it still could be sin. You said one of the fruits of the spirit is self-control.
That's right.
And you can look at different aspects, and people can get very legalistic on these things, and that's where I have a problem. But if God tells you don't partake of this and you partake of it, that's a sin.
Right.
It's just, and it goes into having that discipline. God reminds us that we are temples of the Holy Spirit. So we have to meter what we do in terms of that too, because we are not our own. We were bought with a price, the scripture tells us.
That's exactly right. Yep.
And so with that, you do have to measure it out. And I know, like, for me personally, I can be very, I call it squirrel, like the
Yeah.
dog from the cartoon where it's just like, "Oh yeah, I'm working on the squirrel," So
Yeah.
I'm very particular about like blocking out chunks of time and say, "Okay, during this time, this is what I'm going to be working on. This is how I'm going to, and really making myself disciplined into those areas. There's very few things in life I think you can accomplish if you don't learn how to discipline yourself,
Right.
just in a
Yeah.
lot of different areas.
Any achievers in life that you know of are people that exercise self-management. They say that most millionaires had a C average in high school.
Mhm.
They weren't or college. They're not the A students, the brilliant students. It doesn't have a thing to do with what grade you made or necessarily even your education. It's just they set their mind to do something and then they stick with it
Yeah,
and they don't give up because self-management means you don't give up. Like I failed for the seventh time. I'm just going to quit. Self-management says, no, let's go back and work on it again the eighth time and see
mhm,
what happens. And they're not. So part of self-management is you don't quit and you
right,
and you go after it and you say, here, I'm going to try. So the people who achieve in life are the people who say, I'm going to do what needs to be done and I'm going to get it done. Paul talked about beating the air like you're sparring,
mhm,
shadow boxing.
right,
He said, if I don't want to just beat the air. We would say in modern times, I'm spinning my wheels. It's the worst feeling in the world is you just do all this work and then you're like, I'm not getting anywhere. I'm just spinning my wheels. But when you practice self-management, especially in leadership or temperance, if you want to call it that, you win more, you achieve more, you have a greater impact on people that you lead. And I also
Right.
think it models for other people. I think it sets an example is, okay, this is what I'm doing. I expect you to do the same thing.
Right.
I have a thing that I do, good or bad, but it's worked good for me. I hire people, and then even in my church for volunteers, I one of the traits I look for, and I've got these 4 C's, it's calling and character and chemistry, and then your competencies. But one of the things I do, I hire self-starters. Like, I
Hmm.
am not a micromanager. Some people are in their leadership style. I am not. I'm more a macro manager. I can get down on that level if I have to, but I don't need to spend all my time looking over your shoulder saying, "Are you getting this done? Are you getting this done?" I mean, when I have staff meeting or I come in and deadlines have to be met or projects are supposed to be done and if I come in and they're not met and they're not done, if that happens over a period of time, I don't need you anymore. You know, that
Right.
you've told me you don't need to work here anymore, not me. You've told me that. So I
Right.
always try to hire self-starters, but to be a self-starter or self-work, you have to have self-management.
Yeah.
And so that I think that's really important. And I think godly leaders practice self-management. And I can give you some examples how that reflects. So let's say you're provoked, then you manage your temper. I
Hmm.
think good leaders manage their temper. Now, sometimes you got to get upset. Okay, that's just part of leadership. But the guy that mentored me years ago, I have all of his one-liners and they've helped me. But one of the things he taught me was when you're dealing with someone, for example, and they're mad. Okay, so you got
Hmm.
somebody he said, "When they're at their hottest, you stay at your coolest."
Yeah.
And that has helped me so many times where I wanna get mad, where I wanna raise my voice, where I wanna yell back or shout back or come back. I've learned I need to stay at my coolest. I think another thing about self-management as a leader is that leaders sometimes experience crisis and there
Hmm.
are crises in our organization, whether it's leading in your home, leading at work, leading at church. You can have a crisis in any of these organizations, groups, and the worst leaders in the world trip out, start freaking
Right.
out, and bail out, whatever. Self management. If I manage myself, then I stay calm. The best
Mhm.
leaders stay calm in the middle of the crisis. No panic, no paralysis.
Right.
You just stay calm. Let's come up with a plan. Which leads me to another one, which is you make good decisions under pressure. I had a guy years ago teach me something. They're the 4 Fs, and I've used this over and over. I can't tell how many times I've integrated into my preaching at times. But psychologists say when you're faced with a crisis, you're going to do one of 4 things. You're going to freeze, flee, fight, or you're going to formulate a plan. So you freeze, you flee, you fight, and fight means you're fighting the wrong people. You're just lashing out. It's not working. It's just you're responding to the crisis. But
Right.
but the fourth one is, and so the right answer is to formulate a plan. So
Right.
if you have self-management and you're under pressure, you're faced with a crisis, then you don't freeze, that's paralysis, and you don't flee, which means you bail
Mhm.
out, and you don't fight, which means you lash out. What you do is you say, okay, let's stay calm, everybody. Let's sit down. Let's brainstorm. How can we deal with this? That's what the best leaders do.
And I think I'll share this story from personal example. So this has been 5, 6 years, 7 years ago. My stepdad passed away suddenly, and it kind of you hit that sort of crisis point. Okay, what are we going to do? What happens? There's nothing, this was not planned. We were not ready for this. My mom had already passed away, so he was a widower already. So there wasn't any other family. There wasn't, there was a distant, anyway, distant relatives, but everything fell to my brother and I. And it was like, when we figured out what happened, you have your good cry, you have your moment, and then it's like, "Okay, who do I need to call? What do I need to do? What steps do I need to take? What do we have to make happen next?" And literally that's what I kind of sat down and had to do. Okay, who do I need to call? When, we have to go up there. What do we need to do? And sort of get this plan of attack of, okay, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this. And you sit there and it's like, okay, I can feel about this later,
Mhm. Right. At the
but I gotta
moment,
do
you don't have time to feel, right? Things have
I don't
gotta
have
be
time to
done.
feel. I
Yeah,
gotta do this. I gotta get this done. I have to accomplish these things. I can feel later,
right.
and
I went through
I
that with my dad. My dad died a little over 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and I had to go through the same thing, same thing. So
yeah.
I'm feel you.
And
Yeah.
it does. You do. You either react one of 4 ways because, as we were making calls, that's what we were seeing were those different reactions.
Right. Right.
This freeze, this just breakdown, and not to say that we didn't have that moment, but that moment lasted about 30 minutes, and then it's like, "Okay, now we've gotta start working."
Right.
Especially when it's sudden like that. With my mom's passing, I had a little more time to plan, but I still had to make a list. I still had things to do. I still had things that needed to be accomplished, and just had to buckle down and do it, and like, "Okay, we're gonna make this call. We're gonna do this. I'm gonna go do this. I'm gonna do this."
And
And
sometimes in those crises, like, because that's so emotionally overwhelming and draining, and sometimes you can't function. And so,
Mhm.
because neither one of us right now would say, well, if you don't, if you don't buck up and do those things, that makes you whatever, weak, or it's not. Sometimes
Mhm.
you're so emotional, like you could just, I can't function.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful opportunity for somebody else to step up. And we saw
Yeah.
this happen when my dad died, is we had some other people step up and say, listen, let me help you with this. And so some
Yeah.
key people came in and said, we'll take care of this. My wife was one of them. My wife stepped up. She'll get an extra gem in her crown for being the daughter-in-law extraordinaire and help
Yeah.
my mom and my dad. And she said, let me do it. Let me stay. And
Yeah.
so she stepped in a leadership role and said, I'll be the one. You're too much. And that's why I said it's an opportunity with self-management. It's not only managing yourself or the but sometimes you're stepping in to help somebody else. I'll tell you another thing that's really important, and again, we're talking about being children of God here and living right, living holy, is self-management means that you maintain strong convictions and you exhibit right actions and behavior when you're faced with temptations. And
Yeah.
leaders are faced with temptations, whether that's to cheat or lie or steal or cut corners or pad numbers, let the list go on. You have to do the right thing because we're talking about being godly leaders. Okay,
Right.
so not every leader is godly, but if you're a child of God, you have no choice. You
Right.
have to be a godly leader. And that's the case where, self-management, again, you talked about the self-control is the fruit of the spirit. So this isn't just something I'm mustering up out of my will, but I have
Right.
the power of God and the presence of God that helps me, that I can say no to sin and I can say yes to God, even when I'm in an environment that is secular, not spiritual. Let's say work.
Right.
Okay. And nobody around me. I don't have a pastor looking over my shoulder, and nobody at church will ever know if I do this. Well, God knows,
Right.
and everybody watching you, your testimony, they're going to know.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's a lot riding on the line here for you to say, you know what, I'm going to do the right thing. And I'll tell you what else. I've had people tell me, I've got fellow leaders at work who are doing the wrong thing, and I won't do it. And because I won't, it's threatening what they're doing. And so I'm facing some pressure and some persecution. I don't even know if they're going to let me keep my job. They may force me out. Well, it might cost you. Sometimes doing the right thing, living for Jesus. But again, if that happens, don't worry. God will just give you a better job. I've seen that happen more times than I can ever count.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things where it's the difference between doing the right thing when people are watching and doing the right thing when nobody's watching.
Right.
And if you can do the right thing when nobody's watching, that's going to go better for you in the long run. And it goes
Exactly.
back to what we were talking about last time with integrity. So much of the self-control, it comes back to personal integrity. Do you value your own self that much? We talk about leadership in different ways, and it's like, yeah, okay, I value the people that I have, that I'm surrounded with. I value the people that I'm leading, but also, how much do you value yourself? Do you
Right.
value yourself enough to do the right thing when nobody's watching? Do you value yourself enough to buckle down and do what God has called you to do? Do you value yourself enough to do the hard thing when the easier thing would be to compromise?
Right, and I think that makes the difference between good and great, or maybe bad and good. So, if I was listening to this podcast, and I'd be saying, "Okay, this is intriguing." Some people are saying, I'm pretty good self-management." Others may be saying, "Yeah, this one's hitting really close to home." If we don't if you don't mind, let's just get kind of practical for a few minutes. So,
Yeah.
how do you what can we glean? What lessons can we glean, or what can we learn about self-management. I'm going to share some things personally. Okay. So
Mhm.
for me to exercise really good self-management or self-control, I have to set priorities. So
Yeah.
that's number one. You have to set priorities. What is important? What matters more? Okay. What's important? What matters more? And then those are the things that get my attention first. So once again, I'm going to go back to John Maxwell. And I know it's I just sound like I'm a John Maxwell nut, but I just really has these really good, again, concise things that I use, even though I've read Aubrey Malfers and all these other guys. But so if you want to find out, well, what are my priorities? Okay. He uses the three R's, Heather. This is really cool. So one, what is required? I need
Mhm.
to give attention to what is required. So what does my boss require? That needs to be priority. What does the
Mhm.
company require? That's priority. What does God require? Okay, well, that's got to be priority. So whoever you are accountable to, that becomes your priority. That's
Right.
I'm going to manage. How am I going to manage myself? I got to put those things first because there are
Mhm.
other people involved. Second, what gives the greatest return? So I don't want to give all my time to something that is not going to give me a greater return. I need to give my time and attention primarily, first and foremost, to those things that are going to matter the most and that are going to have the most impact on other people. Third, what brings the greatest reward?
Mhm.
So you have to think about that. What is it that will ultimately the investment has a great return on it. You don't want to allow the urgent to take the place of the important. And so many people do that, where it's a putting out fires mentality, or somebody comes in your office and says, I need this right now. And so,
Mhm.
okay, and it's not your boss, but you're like, okay, and they stop with you. The urgent my brother-in-law has this saying, it's not original with him, but he loves to use it. And it's one of his favorite lines. Your lack of somebody comes in, with their urgent he says, "Your lack of planning does not constitute my emergency."
Right.
And you've
Right.
probably heard that before,
I
and
have.
that's a great one, and sometimes you have to say that, "Your lack of planning does not constitute my emergency. I can't go fixing your problems. I've got my own things I need to achieve."
Yeah, I remember, and this has been several years back. They do it's like a four square grid. So you've
Yes,
got the grid and it's got the four squares in it, and you've got this concept of important and urgent, and
yes,
non-important and non-urgent, and you look at which of those things, if it's important and it's urgent, then you do that first. If it's
right.
not important and it's not urgent and it goes along that scale, you put your tasks or whatever based on that. That's how you define your priority in those
I
things.
am a I am a list person. And again, it's part of my personality. Some people aren't like this, but we can use these as tools. So I'm an achiever. I'm a goal setter and goal achiever. And if I get to the end of the day and I've achieved some goals, that's when I feel the best about myself. That's when I
Mhm,
go to bed and I'm like, oh, and I'll go through my mind. I did this and this and this and this and this. If I haven't achieved much, I don't feel like I've had a good day. But anybody can, you've got a phone, you can put a list on your notes, you can get a good old fashioned pad and pen and just write a list. You'd be amazed at what you get done if you set the priorities. This is the first, this is the second, this is the third. The next thing is I have to control my schedule. And
yeah,
that's one that is super important. And look, if you have a smartphone, and I know this podcast is audio, right? So
mhm,
people can't see, but I'm holding up my smartphone. Everybody's got a smartphone. I guarantee you, I mean, unless it's a flip phone, I guess, every smartphones today have a calendar on them.
well, yeah,
Okay. And I know
I live
people that
by
use their
mine.
phone, right? And people use their phone to obviously make calls. They love to watch videos and TikTok and YouTube and get on Facebook, and they use their phone for all these other reasons. And there's this perfectly good app that you should use every day of your life called the calendar.
Yep,
And you can schedule things on your calendar, and that will help improve your self management. You schedule the things you could do. You could set these reminders on your calendar 1 hour before, 2 hours before, so you don't forget. So you've got a tool right here in this thing that you carry all the time. Another thing is block time for the things and the people that are most important. And I think you mentioned that a little bit ago. You talked about blocking time.
mhm,
Blocking time can make a big difference. I tell people if it's at work, attend to your best work in the morning. You do your best work in the morning. And one of the things they tell us is don't look at emails. I mean, unless it has to do with your work. Some people
right,
get on emails and then it just eats up all your time. It consumes your time because morning is your premium production time. And then you got to find what works for you. Some people are more productive in the morning, some in the afternoon, some in the evening. You have to look at that and you have to say, I'm an evening person. Maybe you have health issues. I'm a slow starter in the morning. Okay, that's great. Afternoon, evening. How
Yeah.
does that work for you? I remember when I went into the first time I went to full-time ministry, I've been working secular jobs, clocking in, punching in, you know? So now I'm a pastor, and I finally, after a few weeks, I went to my pastor. I said, "You gotta help me with this because I don't know how to manage this. I don't know what because I'm trying to manage myself, but things are all over the map. I got stuff in the morning, I got stuff in the afternoon, church things happen at night." And he taught me a lesson. He said, if your mornings and afternoons are busy, he said, then block out your evenings and don't
Hmm.
do anything. He
Yeah.
said, if your mornings and your evenings are busy, he said, then block out your afternoon, go home, do whatever you got to do, run errands, do you time. He said,
Yeah.
if your afternoons and evenings, he said, then take your morning. He said, if you don't control your schedule, he said, in the church, you can go all day long. He said,
Oh,
so you
yeah.
have to learn how to
Yeah.
block your schedule.
And that
And
works, regardless. Like for me, being self-employed, I have to
yes.
do the same thing. It's like,
Oh,
okay,
yes.
this is because I know personally I'm more productive in the afternoons. So I tend
Okay.
to schedule the podcast recordings for the afternoons because I know I'm going to be firing a little better,
Yes.
and
Right.
a little more sharp than I would be like at 9 o'clock in the morning. But I also know that I tend to sometimes go into the evening simply because that's part of my productive time. So I might have like the next day I might have a slower morning. But and even the Lord gets on me about this. Control your time because
Yeah.
it's so important and it doesn't matter if you're a pastor, if you're just in the job market, you control your time because if you don't, somebody else will, whether it's your
Yes.
boss, whether it's your family. And I'm all about family time, priorities. Again, goes back to priorities, if you've got kids and you've got things you've got to do with those kids, yes. But I think, and I remember having talking to a friend of mine on an episode, and this has been several months back, about the concept of boundaries and the concept of rest.
Yes.
And that I think is as important when you get into self-management and getting into blocking your time and setting out those times. You have to set those boundaries. And I'm thinking about, from a ministry standpoint, if you don't protect your time, somebody will fill it.
Oh, absolutely.
Something will fill
And
it.
then here's another issue. I taught my boys this when they were young. They're all grown now, and I've got 6 grandchildren, so I'm really, really blessed. But I taught both my boys this. I said, "Okay, here's 2 lessons you can learn." So here's lesson number 1. You're either gonna pay now or you're gonna pay later. Okay? So you have to figure out, are you gonna pay now or are you gonna pay later? Okay, so they started grabbing that. I said, "'Cause if you pay now, then you free up the future, and then you can do what you wanna do and you've taken care of it up front." I said, if you decide to play around and do things and then put it off, I said, you're going to pay, but it's going to be later. And I said, then you're going to feel the crunch. You're going to feel the pressure. It's going to be rushed. I said, so figure it out. I said, here's the second one I'm going to teach you. And they can quote these back to you, by the way. You can play now and pay later, or you can pay now and play later.
Yeah.
So when they were in school and they were coming home, I said, okay, you've got homework to do. I said, you can either play now and you can pay later and do your homework later. I said, or you can pay now and take about 30 minutes, debrief, decompress a little bit from school, get your homework done. We eat supper, and then the rest of the evening's yours. So if you
Right.
guys want to go play with your friends, you want to watch TV, you want to get on video games, you'll have the rest of it. So I taught them. And so obviously where I pushed them was pay now.
Right.
The better thing is to pay now, play later. And so
Yeah.
you get it done up front. And if you play now, then the whole time you realize while you're trying to enjoy life, "God, when I get done, I got to go do this." So those are some principles. Another lesson I learned is I have to stop making excuses. And that's a
Yeah.
big one. Okay. Because excuses and procrastination are just cheap ways of avoiding personal responsibility. And all of us, including me, because I don't want to come across here as some expert, I still fight it because we're all human. We'd probably be shocked at how much time we still waste.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, really.
The wonderful thing about the cell phone is the calendar. The horrible thing about the cell phone is it has the internet.
Yep.
And that's something that I'm personally working on. I'll be honest, that's something I'm personally working on to not spend as much time scrolling through whatever, or even not spend as much time playing games on the phone. Just
Right.
it's like it's
Exactly.
an easy distraction and it's like, no, and maybe this will help somebody. I've started if I need to take a quick break, step away from something, I set a 15-minute timer. Okay, I can play my game for 15 minutes and then I get back at it.
See,
You
and
know,
you're
and
using the tools to help you manage self. See, that's a
Exactly.
great what you just said is great. You set a timer, take a because I'm like you, I'm the same way. I get into stuff, but I hit a block. Do you do that? I hit a mental roadblock. Like my
Yep.
brain just says, "All right, it's enough." And I get up, I have to walk away, take a
Mhm.
little break, then I
Mhm.
come back again, I can dive right in. Now my wife, some of your listeners are like my wife, she's a slow starter. Once she stops, you can't stop her. Like,
Right.
I'm like, "Babe, step away from the you've been there for 2 hours." "No, I'm in the flow." Yeah,
I'm in the
she's in the
zone.
flow. I'm in the flow, in the zone. And so, but you're right, you have to take those little breaks and they help. But there was a period of my life where I was pastoring a church. I was actually going through a major building program in our church. I had 2 kids in school. I was raising 2 kids, trying to go to my son's sports events, but I wanted to earn a master's degree.
Right.
And I knew the only way to do this was I was gonna have to exercise self-management, and again, I had to do it online. So,
Right.
today you can get your degrees totally online, and so I went online to get my master's degree, and I knew the only way would do this, I had to practice extreme self-management. So I did all these other things from morning to night, and at 9 o'clock every night, I would tell the family, "Leave me alone." Of course, the kids usually were getting close to bed, and I would go into my study, shut the door, 9 o'clock every night. And from 9 to whatever, 10, or if it was 10:30, however long it took, I would watch whatever I was supposed to watch for my classes. I'd read journals. I'd take tests. If I had to take a
Mhm.
test, you do that whatever I need, I read all my reading I had to do. If I had to write papers, you have to write a paper for every graduate class. And I did all that and I did it. It took me 3.5 years, or whatever it took me, I can't remember now, 3 or 4 years, but I did it and I got it. But only way I did it, Heather, was I had to exercise self-control, self-management, and I had to stop making excuses, set priorities. And another reason why this is so important, because if you practice self-management, then you actually create time for yourself. And that's kind of that pay now, play later, but not just for yourself. You make time for God. And that's part of self-management. You got to make sure you make time for God. Read your Bible, pray. Praying is
Right.
how you talk to God. Reading the Bible is how God talks to you. You got to make time if you're married, make time for your spouse. If you have children, you need to make time for your kids. So it's managing yourself in that I've got to make sure that I'm doing what I need to do. And then, if I make time and I'm managing, then like with my flock, my church, I can feel like I'm actually ministering to them, because if not, if I don't self-manage, if you're not careful, then I feel like my flock's an inconvenience
Right.
because they need this and this one needs this. And well, if I would manage myself better, then I can make sure that I'm doing all the things and I'm using my time the best. I'm
Yeah,
using
and
the
being
time
able to
like
be flexible when a need
yes.
arises, like the situation that you're currently dealing with. I mean, there's times when you have to pivot. So and here's another thing, and this is probably a good way to end. When you're dealing with self-management, you also have to allow for the pivots for the unexpected.
Yes.
When things come up, there are times because I know some people who can get so regimented into the scheduling that there's no flexibility. And
Yeah.
when you do that, then you're just going to set yourself up for frustration. So you
Yes.
have to have those
That's good.
allowances for emergencies, for, something invariably will come up that you are not
Interruptions.
expecting. Interruptions,
Interruptions. Yep.
especially in a ministry standpoint, somebody needs something, you need to be there. You can't say, "Oh, well, my schedule's busy, sorry."
Right.
There has to be this accommodation, and if we regiment ourselves too much, we can't be useful in that regard. So, that's just a
Exactly.
thought
That's
I
a
have.
really good point. I think that's a great point. Great way to end. Yeah. Leave room for the unexpected. And
Yeah.
so good. Yeah.
So, any final thoughts you have, Pastor Chris?
I think, that if we will practice self-management in all of life, and, we're talking about leadership, but self-management, again, because it's a fruit of the spirit, it's a great character trait to have for just life, and I think it
Yeah,
makes life better,
yeah,
okay? But I also think it makes leadership better. But, if it just helps, figure out the direction you wanna go, which, to me is kinda like the what. Okay, you have to those are priorities, and then you have to have determination, which I think is really important, is the motivation. Find the motivation, be passionate. The why. Why am I gonna do this? And
right,
sometimes the why behind the what helps us to get going.
right,
But then you have to have the diligence, which is the perseverance.
Yeah.
You actually got to go do it. It's not enough just talk about it and say, I'm determined. You got to go do it. And that's
That's your
how are
how.
you going to do this? Get your steps, get them in line. And then finally, you have to have the discipline because it just has to go day after day after day after week. Stay focused on the priorities, stay focused on what you want to achieve. And when you do that, then so you got the what and the why and the how, but then you get the win. And that's when
Yeah.
you get to enjoy life. Because
Mhm.
ultimately, this sounds like, well, this just sounds like so menial and like a bunch of work. No, it's setting goals to ultimately enjoy some things in life and have the win and celebrate.
Absolutely. Well, Pastor Chris, thank you so much for joining me this week. And last, tell the folks where they can find you in High Praises Church.
Yes, we are located on 4506 Midway Road in Anderson, South Carolina, in the Anderson area. If anybody knows where the jockey lot is, we're a couple miles from the jockey lot there on Midway Road, not far from the interstate either. You can learn more about us at www.highpraises.org, and you can check out the church and what we have to do there. And also, I have written a book called The God Approved Leader, and it contains a lot of what we talked about today and more. I wrote it for leaders who are Christians and how you take leadership principles and merge them with biblical principles, which is what we have to do. And you can find that book actually on Amazon. I have 4 books and they're all on Amazon. So just type in my name or type in the God Approved Leader, and if you want to get that, feel free to purchase it.
Awesome. And I will put links to the book and to the church on the website. And so you've been listening to Exchanging Eternal Truths. If you would like to partner with us in the creation of this positive, encouraging biblical content, you can check out our website. It's expandingyourfaith.org. And until next week, be blessed, my friends.